Hi everybody, I'm still in South Australia, and I did this interview today with this extraordinary man. His name is Bronte Coup, and prepare yourselves. This is a very powerful, it'll leave you thinking. I'm still in South Australia probably till Monday or maybe Tuesday. If you want to reach out to me, if you want to do an interview, please do so. Till then, enjoy the interview. Until I get my cup of tea.
But yes, but the parallels with Nazi Germany...
And we are off.
Okay.
The parallels with
Nazi Germany are extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. I listened to a woman called Vera Sharav, who you probably have heard of. She's just so powerful because she says all this stuff that this is the same. It is the same as in Nazi Germany, and that these evil bastards that are sitting behind this have evil intent in their heart. But for an ordinary person with a decent set of values, they cannot conceive of the fact that there might be people who do have evil intent. I think this is one of the biggest things, because we all grew up in essentially a Christian country, Judeo-Christian heritage.
Fairness.
I treat you as I expect to be treated. Yeah. And it's a little bit like when you bump into a con artist. Every now and again, you bump into somebody who's just got the gift of the gab, could sell ice to Eskimos and seems like such a great person. And then a little while down the track, you think, hang on, this guy's a shonk. And you can't believe it because he's a nice guy. I mean, we met one of these a few years ago, my wife and I. And the guy was utterly duplicitous. But he was as funny as a fit. He was the most authentic, warm, genuine person you'd ever want to meet. And if he'd have said to us, will you invest $50,000 in this project, we probably would have thought about it.
A perfect example is I met Alan Bond. Now, I don't know if Alan Bond is a con man, but everyone was saying he was. But when I met him, you could not like him. There was something about him that was magnetic.
Yes. Well, they talk about Bill Clinton as being like that he had a magnetic personality, made you feel like you're the only person in the room. Yeah. While all sorts of things were going on in other rooms, which were not sex. They were just not sex.
So do what you said before about the analogy of the two types of people, because that's great.
Yes, I came to the conclusion after some months of looking at what was going on and writing to people and talking to people. There's two kinds of people who are involved in this game, this malevolent game. They're both bastards. There's stupid bastards and there's malicious bastards. And it's not always clear which group a person fits into. The vast majority are just stupid bastards.
So that's what I was going to say, the vast majority are stupid bastards.
They're vast majority stupid bastards. I met some stupid bastards who were Christian principals of Christian schools, who were, without batting an eyelid, happy to kick staff out, healthy, well-able, competent staff, because they didn't want to take a medical procedure, which we now know doesn't work. Doesn't do what it says on the label. And I put it to the guy, I put it to the principal that I was speaking to. I was an advocate for a group of staff, and I went and sat around this big conference table with this principal of a big secondary school, big Lutheran secondary school, and I said, you do realise that what you're saying is that these teachers here, and I pointed to the women in the room, and I said, what you're saying is that these teachers represent a disease risk to your staff and your school. He said, no, I'm not. I said, that is exactly what you're saying. He couldn't see it. He just couldn't see it. He's a stupid bastard. But there are a small group of malicious bastards, and I think there's a few in Australia.
Can I ask, with these malicious bastards, do you think, like, say, let's talk about Klaus, that they have a vision?
Yes.
And their vision means that the ends justify the means?
Indeed. I mean, I think that's one of the things. I remember reading a quote from, what's the name? The woman who wrote the book about totalitarianism in the 50s or 60s, and she talked about Adolf Eichmann at the Nazi war crime trials and how she described what she talked about as the banality of evil. Yeah. Just an ordinary man who would go home and kiss his wife and pat his children on the head and exterminate Jews the next morning.
Probably had a cat.
Yeah, well, probably. So, and this is the cleverness. This is the genius of it. Once you're doing something for a person's health, there is no limit.
Yeah.
There's just no limit to what you can permit yourself to do. So, for example, one of the things that I did for my sins, I put in a discrimination complaint against the Spark on Whitmore, which was a hotel in Adelaide that went on the TV news just when the lockdowns and the vaccine mandates started, proudly saying that they weren't going to let any of those poxy unvaccinated people into their hotel. And I was sitting there with my dinner on my lap, watching the television thinking, what? Are you serious? And I had a little bit of a think about it, and I thought, well, actually, this is outrageous. So I put in a discrimination complaint against them. And it went to the South Australian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. We went all the way to a hearing, and of course, as you do a lot of research, and the law is very clear. This all started from a little girl called Eve van Grafhorst, who was prevented from going to the local childcare centre because she contracted HIV through a blood transfusion. And the childcare centre proprietors panicked and said, she can't come in here unless she wears a mask or a
biosuit or something.
Yeah, biosuit. And that led to Australian law being changed so that the law says, the government says to the population, if you believe somebody is sick, you cannot discriminate against them. Well, that's essentially what the hotel was saying. They were saying, I believe if you come into my hotel without your little green tick on your phone, you are carrying a disease, or you might be carrying a disease, or I suspect you're carrying a disease, and you're not coming in. Well, that's discriminatory. The law is really, really clear. The only rider is if it's reasonable. Are the steps, the measures that the business is taking reasonable? And this is the loophole that they got out of, that they used to get out of it. But essentially, they're stupid bastards. You know, the hotel proprietor was just a naive woman who accepted what St. Nicola told her, which is everybody must be panic-stricken. Everybody must rush out and get jabbed in the arm with this untested gene therapy that we call a vaccine. And she naively thought that because she was wearing a white coat and she was a chief medical officer, she wouldn't lie. She wouldn't be deceptive. She must be telling the truth. So that's fine. So we actually went to the South Australian Civil and Administrative Tribunal. I had a colleague and I that had worked on it for months. There were two arguments. The first one is the law is wrong and this is discriminatory. And the second one is it's not reasonable under the circumstances because the evidence shows the disease is not that serious.
Yeah.
That's the most important thing. The disease is
People are not dropping dead in the street.
Well,
not of COVID anyway.
No, it's about the same as a mild flu or a severe flu. That's about it. And we collectively, the majority of the world knows this now, despite the television saying differently. But it came unstuck because in the end, the adjudicator, the SACAT member or tribunal member, I can't remember the exact term, simply looked me in the eye and said, we're not interested in looking at the medical evidence.
Yeah, that's happened across the country in
thought,
all the cases.
Whoa, you're not interested in looking at the medical evidence. In other words, the reasonable test is over and done because we have decided that the government has said it's reasonable. Therefore, it's unable to be challenged. And to make matters worse, the Spark on the Whitmore had engaged the Australian Hotels Association lawyer as their champion. And he was quite a bulldog and was quite aggressive. And he said, you're a malicious complainant and we're going to ask for costs if you go to the full tribunal hearing. And I said to the adjudicator, excuse me, as I understand it, civil and administrative tribunals normally don't have lawyers and normally it's every person bears their own costs. And she said, yes, that's normally the case. But the door is always open for the presiding member to make a ruling against you regarding costs. And I thought, aha, so we've made up our mind that this is not a valid issue that we don't want to entertain in the arena of the public discourse of, civil and administrative tribunals. And if you stupid little twerp, were to go to the tribunal, we'll go you for costs. So not only will you lose, but you'll get to pay for the other party. And at that point I thought, right, I'm scum. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
So I withdrew. And that was the end of the matter. But for me, the takeaway was that if the state decides that it doesn't want to play by the normal rules, it just ignores them.
Yes.
So we can ignore the Constitution.
Yes.
We can ignore informed consent.
Yes.
We can ignore the breaches of the Nuremberg Code. We can ignore the Helsinki principles. In fact, actually, we can pretty much ignore everything because, well, we're the government.
Well, we've been saying for a while now, we're from Melbourne, that we're lawless. They're just making it up as they go.
Yes, yes. And Australians can't get their head around that because we've got this, well, we've got a British system of justice that to this point has been probably one of the best in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I was a public servant. I spent 20-odd years advising ministers and chief executives, and one of the things that I would have said was really a very true thing is that the Australian public service is honest, it's well run, it's not corrupt, and we have a pretty good public administration system. New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK are amongst the best run governments or public service systems in the world. We're legendary.
Yeah.
But to see that all turned on its head because somebody has decided, well, we don't want to play by those rules anymore, that made me highly suspicious.
Well, in Victoria, I mean, I'm not from South Australia, but Victoria, we've seen it clearly. Dan stacked the courts.
Yes.
And everything fails,
Yes.
and they don't care.
No.
I think there was a Supreme Court hearing or a High Court hearing where the judges had a 12-page summary of why the word absolute doesn't mean absolute.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I think as a public servant, that's probably been the deepest shock to me, because I have always assumed that even if they were a little bit reluctant to do so, the judiciary and the administrative bods, the bureaucrats, would do the right thing. They would follow the letter of the law to the extent that they were obliged to do so, but it would appear not.
Where is this? Do you think this is majority of stupid bastards trying to appease? Because at the moment, it's almost like a game.
Yes.
We're the underdogs, and they don't want to let us win, and they'll move the goalposts wherever they can to make sure we can't score a goal. Yeah.
Well, one of the things you need to realise is that to succeed in public sector land, you need to wear a brown cardigan and you need to have leather patches on your elbows and you need to go, yes, yes, sir, yes, boss, whatever you want. Like, I'm exaggerating, but essentially compliance is highly valued. They'll never tell you that. Yeah. It's not in the public service values, but that's the reality. So if you are a bit of an outlier, if you've got a bit of strength of character, if you're prepared to challenge decisions, you just find that you just don't flourish. So the people who get to senior roles are innately highly compliant people. And when the state comes out and says, this is the way things are, if the chief medical officer says, I have made the pronouncement, and the Premier says, she or he is right, that's the end of it for most public servants.
Wow.
Because if they stand against that, they'll never be promoted again, they'll possibly be sidelined, they'll be blackballed socially in the world in which they work. So you need a pretty determined, strong personality to be able to...
Who have already been weeded out.
Yes, normally, yeah. I mean, for me, just as a little aside, I had a bit of a brief inkling of how corrupt public service organisations can be. Some years ago, I was working in the Deputy Chief Executive's office in a large government agency in South Australia. A colleague came into our workspace for a bit of a time out because she'd been subjected to some horrendous workplace bullying. And I got chatting with her and she said to me, look, this went on and he'd be in my face and he'd shout at me on the floor and people had to intervene. I said, excuse me, this is textbook workplace bullying. She said, yes, I know, but they won't listen to me. I said, I'll help you. So I spent many hours and documented a formal complaint with all the evidence, and I thought, this is just so textbook. Nobody could not deal with this. Well, anyway, they didn't want to know about it. The powers that be refused to accept the evidence and the testimony of this 60-page document that I helped this poor bullying victim put together. So I requested an internal review from an independent third party. That didn't work. I then requested an external review They got an independent consultant in who had obviously a little bit of a chat with the executive, who said, now the outcome we want is for, and the consultant went, yeah, got that. So that didn't work. We ended up going to the ombudsman.
Because if he finds or she finds against it, she won't get another
She'll never
gig.
get another contract.
Yeah.
It went to the ombudsman in the end, the state ombudsman, and finally it went to ICAC, the Independent Commission Against Corruption, because the allegation was this is misfeasance in public office. This is public officials not doing the job that they are signed up to do, one of which is to provide safe and healthy working environments. And ICAC finally investigated it and said, yep, it's textbook bullying, but, well, it's a bit late in the piece. 7 years that took. 7 years. And we persevered because we'd put that much effort into it. We wanted to see the thing out. But by the time we did, and we reached the 7-year mark, the person involved had been offered a package and returned to went to another career track, and I was completely cynical and sceptical about public service land, even though I was a public servant. So this is the thing that the average person doesn't realise, that when the state decides to do something, either a good thing or a not so good thing, it is almost impossible to stop them, unless en masse everybody says, no, we're not going to comply.
Which is interesting because it's almost like osmosis.
Yes.
The compliance there spreading out to the community, because I've brought it up that for the last, or all my life really, if you were compliant, you did better in Australia.
Yes.
In everything. You
Yes.
got pay rises,
Yeah.
you moved up. So we've basically been trained to be compliant.
We have, yeah. I think this is one of the differences between Australian culture and, for example, American culture. I did my master's in public policy and management at Carnegie Mellon when it had a campus here in Adelaide, and I was exposed to quite a lot of the US academics. And the American exceptionalism that people talk about is really a true thing, and it really does deeply affect the psyche of Americans. In a way that gives Americans a different flavour to Australians. So forget the Hollywood stereotypes, but Americans have a sense of pride that America's a unique place in the world, and it is a bit like Australia. We've got a much nicer place. It's a bit more low key, but we've got the same fantastic stuff with an honest system of government, a democratically elected group of politicians. These are wonderful things. These are aberrations. We've lived under serfdom for most of humanity's history.
That's correct.
From the
And heading back there.
Well, we are heading back there. It's the new dark age, in my opinion. But my point is, you get to see the American exceptionalism, and you have the extremes. You have the fruitcakes on one side who kind of are running down a particular path and can't sort of see any other way around it. And then you have on the other side, you have exceptional individuals who are at the peak of their careers in terms of knowledge and expertise and skills. And these people are just fantastic. So, one of the best examples is Dr. Peter McCullough, who's the legend, who's almost... You'd probably say him with Dr. Robert Malone are probably the leaders globally of this move.
Yeah, that's correct.
And Dr. Peter McCullough has been stripped of his positions. They're trying to destroy his career with every ounce of their strength. And yet when you listen to him speak, he speaks with such humility and such clarity and such integrity. You're left in no doubt that the man knows exactly what he's talking about and that he's being truthful. So, and yet, the man is clearly a genius. He's had something like 650 peer-reviewed articles published.
Correct.
So he's the most published man in cardiology in his field in the world. I mean, you know how much effort it requires to write one article.
The guy that invented the PCR test said don't use it. The guy who invented MRR says don't use it. And Peter McCullough is going, and yet. One thing that started early on in the freedom movement, everyone was saying the truth shall set us free. But it's not setting us free, because what I'm noticing is people don't want the truth.
Agreed. I once bumped into a retired Baptist minister, and I had a bit of a chat with him one morning, and he said to me, the thing about truth is that it's not that it's unconvincing, it's that it is unwelcome. People really don't want to know the truth. And I thought, that's a very odd thing to say. Of course you want to know the truth. Everybody wants to know the truth. But he was right and I was wrong. I hadn't seen that for a variety of reasons, many people do not want to know the truth. I think probably no more than 10% of Australians probably want to know the truth. The rest don't. They want to be told what to do.
A perfect example of it, I was at a political meeting and the other side was there and some pro-jab nurse was there, and I said, wearing a mask, and I said, Fauci said the masks don't work, and she said he never said that. And I had the interview in 60 Minutes where he's literally saying, and she's looking at it and she's blinking like it's affecting her. She's like, how do I get away from this?
Yes.
And then she was really agitated.
Yeah, I had this experience early on, and I called it cognitive dissonance, and realised that everybody else was suffering from the same thing. It's the tension you find when your eyes see things, your mind absorbs things, and you read evidence, and yet you've got this contradictory propaganda. Essentially, it's the mind's reaction to propaganda. You want to believe the propaganda because it comes from a person with authority. And yet your intellect, your scepticism, your first-hand knowledge says this is propaganda. It's not correct. So the classic was the 95% effective thing about the vaccine, which now we know was essentially smoke and mirrors and very clever distortion of relative risk reduction compared to absolute risk reduction. And yet people, when they get to that point of realising that they were lied to, or perhaps the truth's been embellished a bit, can't say we were conned. The reality is the whole world was magnificently, beautifully, impeccably choreographed with a giant con, a psychological operation. And it was just executed with such panache. You've got to give them credit.
Yeah, medical Pearl Harbor.
Yes.
And that's why when monkeypox came along, we were ready for it.
Yeah.
We killed it with memes.
Yeah. Look, humour, cynicism, scepticism are invaluable. I think for me the takeaway is that action probably in Australia largely needs to happen at the local level with people talking to their friends and family and capitalising on common sense. So we had friends, for example, who ostracised us, wouldn't see us because we were not vaccinated. Lovely people. We've been long-term friends with them. They just couldn't get their head around it. We didn't talk to them about it, but they did know we were not vaccinated. Then they travelled interstate for a holiday and got COVID, even though they'd been vaccinated. And things kind of just melted away. We never spoke about it. And we're just grateful that we've got their friendship back.
Yeah.
But they were smacked in the face with common sense.
Yeah.
And my wife...
Some of them take it 2 or 3 times. Some of them have had it 2 or 3. Every time they get the vax, then they get COVID. And on the 3rd time, they suddenly go, what?
A bit like the Prime Minister, who's on his 2nd dose of COVID, I think. And he's got 4 shots. So common sense is kind of kicking in. Well, my wife said to me, she said, anybody can tell that the vaccine doesn't work. I said, how do you work that out? She said, well, how did it get to Australia? In the bodies of thousands of passengers in aircraft wearing masks. That's how it got here. So that tells you all you need to know.
Yeah.
So there's your common sense. And yes, it's backed up with other facts and so on. But it gets back to the point you made earlier, Michael. If you don't permit yourself to think a certain thing, your brain just goes, no, I'm not going to think about that.
Yeah.
So there's a whole swag of people who just cannot get their head around the fact that the medical profession and the public health bureaucracy and the politicians have screwed them over.
Yeah.
They just can't get...
they've been screwed over, like you said. They're stupid bastards through compliance.
Yes.
They're unable to stand up to their masters, and sort of it's just the stupidity is just...
thing.
Yeah, it's just, Because I noticed we saw a thing yesterday, we poked fun at it 2 days ago, in Reservoir in Melbourne. The council and the doctors, no one will admit that the vaccine is causing heart attacks, and yet they're installing so many defibs You're only ever 400 metres away from one.
Yeah.
So if you want to get to hospital, you can literally defib your way there.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. I mean, as an ex-public servant, I can tell you that government never admits liability.
Yeah.
And there's a legal reason. Government has to be the model litigator because government doesn't want to be sued. They don't want to have their ass sued off by thousands of people who are putting in a claim. So government, therefore, uses weasel words and it backpedals and it changes the story, but it never can. You'll never get a politician who'll stand up in front and say, "Do you know, we really stuffed that one." They're never going to do it, and I kind of understand that. But there's been a reluctance to even admit what's going on because you're quite right. They're talking about the hospitals being overrun, but it's probably the doubling of the number of cardiac patients.
That's right.
That's what's causing the problem.
That's right. And everyone's vaccinated.
Yes, and so the pandemic of the unvaccinated is obviously now the pandemic of the vaccinated. Well, it's the illnesses of the vaccinated that is the problem. For me, there's going to come a Waterloo moment, though, I think, because there's two really, really serious things that can't be ignored indefinitely, and the first one is the excess deaths. We've got something like 17.1% excess deaths.
I think they say, Dr. Pay told me it's the equivalent of a jumbo jet crashing every 2 weeks.
Yes, that's exactly right. These are massive numbers.
Yeah.
Edward Dowd, the guy who really got across all this excess death stuff in the US by looking at all the data, he said a 10% increase in excess deaths is something like a Six Sigma out of the box event, 1 in 200 years. That's 10%.
Yeah.
We've got almost double that, and it's not looking like changing.
You're saying it's statistically impossible, and it's equivalent of the death of the dinosaurs.
Yeah, it's staggering. Well, in the US,
that's a good point. We've been just because we talk like this, and I do listen more than I talk usually. But I was saying, do you feel that the great conflict's going to come now between people with their need to comply, but their survival instinct need to survive?
Yes.
When they're realising I'm complying, but at some point realising we're dying. So there's going to be a huge conflict in Australia.
Yeah, I agree. So I think the excess death is the nuclear bomb that will eventually go off. Because if we keep up, and that was the second thing I was going to mention, the birth rate. I actually was in the COVID trial called what was I can't think of the name. Anyway, we did a trial using ivermectin and some other drugs, and the guy who was the supervisor of Queensland, his data, which with high-risk pregnancies, was just mind-boggling. The number of miscarriages, of birth defects and serious problems amongst vaccinated young mums compared to the unvaccinated. And he tried to get the stuff published and he lost his job and it's the same old story. But this is the thing that will, I think, get the mother gorillas and the father gorillas out when they realise their children are not going to be able to have more children, or the risk is there for children to not be able to, when they grow up, to continue to give birth to however many children they choose to have. I think that's probably the catastrophic thing. It's a question of when it will surface. At some point, this will surface, even if it's not for 1 or 2 years.
Well, it might be like when the Arab Spring started. It started from one young man setting himself alight, and that set everything off. But going back to so you've got the what you were saying there, but the other frightening thing that's happening now is the way the basically hate speech against the anti-vaxxers, the word itself, the shooting happening in Queensland now. They're basically trying to portray us all as these violent extremists just waiting to blow up like time bombs.
Yep.
And that's from the people I've met, it's the complete opposite. We're just critically thinking people.
Of course.
How do you think we deal with that? Because this has happened in the past in Germany. I actually wonder now, we were talking about this last night, even pre-war Germany, there was actually a big resistance like us, who have just been erased from history. And we've never heard from them, maybe one or two, but they actually did have, and they're gone. And so how do you see that unfolding?
Okay, I think the thing to remember is that anybody who has a position that's slightly sceptical about the vaccines needs to be very careful and very measured in what they say, and make sure that it is evidence-based and that the claims are not excessive. So probably the best example of somebody who really stuffed it but had things heading in the right direction to begin with was Dr. Brian Ardis, who's a chiropractor. He's the guy who identified the problem with remdesivir being a really dangerous drug, which is now, I think, even in Australian hospitals, but certainly in American hospitals.
Run, death is near.
Yeah, run, death is near. That's exactly right. Well, he came across all that, and he spilt the beans and promoted the fact that this drug was so dangerous, but it was because they were making very big profits out of it. And I think Fauci even had intellectual property shares in it. He certainly was up to his neck in the trials that they used remdesivir in to do with treating Ebola. So he was one of the good guys. He's a very sharp cookie, but he had this cockamamie idea about snake venom, which got a little bit of airplay for a while until Paul Marrick or one of the frontline COVID care consortium guys just completely blew it out of the water. I was sceptical when I listened to it. So that's a good example where you've got to be careful. You've got to do your homework. If you can't say something with a very high degree of confidence, you ought to be silent.
And all these things make us look like idiots.
They make you look like idiots, yes, absolutely. But on a personal, individual level, one of the best weapons is to be a credible and authentic person and realise that a percentage of the people you speak to won't want to hear this. They can't. I've got a good friend who said, I trust what my doctor tells me. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
It's not worth going any further because who am I to question his doctor?
Well, the other thing too is people build constructs. I mean, basically, we're living on a rock, spinning through a vacuum we don't understand, and people build their own realities. And in his reality, that doctor is the person he goes to for wisdom, medical wisdom.
It's the voice of authority.
Yeah.
You know, for me, one of the aha things over this whole 2 years has been the level of corruption and perversity that exists in the medical health establishment. And this is really brilliantly brought to light by Robert Kennedy's book, The Real Anthony Fauci. And the other one is Peter Bregan's book about the global predators. These are really top-shelf books, eminently well researched, rock-solid references. Essentially, the pharmaceutical industry have gradually, bit by bit, encroached on the medical regulatory world and medical centres and the mainstream media. So they now own them all. They own them all. They own them lock, stock and barrel.
Well, the media was... there was two things I wanted to bring up with you from your point of view. I'll start first with the digital ID and the social credit score system, which you're probably following it. And I think it's here in bits already. How do you see that unfolding? Because the bureaucracy will be behind it.
Yes, they will be behind it, and a certain percentage of Australians will take it up. Because there's plenty of Australians who just assume that what the television tells them is more or less reasonable. For those people who realise that they largely fed propaganda almost exclusively, they will be a bit sceptical. I think the digital ID is going to worry more people, even people who are pro-vaccine. Digital ID is going to worry more people because although they see the convenience factor, they're going to be a little bit concerned about security. You've got the Optus hack, the Telstra hack. You've got essentially once your identity is encapsulated in a digital environment, somebody can hack it. There's no security. You know, I've got a driver's license. It's a hard copy thing. I keep it. If I lose it, I get another one. It's rock solid. It's untouchable. So I think the digital ID will frighten a few people. I think the central bank digital currencies, which I know they're already starting to roll out in 1 or 2 countries, that will terrify the crap out of people because it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that if the government controls your funds through some sort of digital bank, effectively, they can turn it off or control how you use it. And freedom is gone, potentially. And it doesn't matter how many weasel words you pump out to try and reassure everybody that it's convenient and this and that. a lot of people will go, "Well, hang on, that's a bridge too far."
Well, it's like walking. They're saying now we're walking into our own digital prison.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. Well, that's exactly what it is. I mean, I remember watching some documentaries about the Chinese social credit system, and that was frightening, the level of control that the communist state has. But this is the world we live in. For the first time, some schmuck sitting on a computer somewhere running an algorithm can stop you from buying something in a shop. Just like they can turn off your vaccine passport.
Just because you've shared something they don't like.
Precisely, yeah. And I think as time goes by, more and more people are going to be more sceptical about government. They're going to be sceptical about government having their best intentions at heart. I mean, for example, the robo-debt scandal that happened in Australia, that showed that government was completely impassive, completely unmoved by the hardship. And it wasn't until somebody discovered, the system's not actually lawful, that things changed. So there's a little bit more scepticism, I think, that will come on.
How do you explain then that say Dan Andrews has now won a greater majority? Now, some people say it was fraudulent. I have people that were what do you call them? Where they're looking at the votes.
Poll watchers.
But there's all dodgy talk. But the reality is there's a lot of people who adore him and think he saved them. And in WA, they think McGowan is their saviour.
Yes, and there's a really easy answer to that, and that is that. And Matthias Desmet, the guy who wrote the mass formation book, which is I bought a copy of it, but I haven't read it yet. I've got so many other books to read. He basically says 10% of people are independent thinkers. 90% want to be told what to do. That's just humanity. And I think he's right. I think that's the thing. Because I don't like to be told what to do and I am an independent thinker and I'm sceptical, I assume, wrongly, that others share that view.
Yeah.
And that is the only explanation for the Dan Andrews and the Mark McGowan wins. People like a strong leader. They just do.
Especially in a dangerous time.
Yes.
So there's a lot of fear around. And Matthew Guy, he just looked like, I call him the asexual insipid son of Mr. Sheen.
Yeah.
You know, there was just nothing to believe in.
Yes, yes, Mr. Doormat. I mean,
Sorry, Matthew.
Unfortunately, all the Liberal politicians, mostly in Australia, are pretty much tarred with the same brush. They're people. They're not men and women of principle. They're men and women of politics, and they're two completely different things. Politics is about power. Principle is about doing the right thing. And until you get Peter Dutton and more of the Liberals saying to the camera, what I'm going to say to you might not be palatable, but it's true. I mean, that's the reason John Howard was successful for the number of years that he was successful. I mean, as a young person, I used to poo-poo him. Little Johnny.
Yeah, we all
little Johnny, I used to take the piss out of him.
But we still all voted for him.
But yeah.
Well, I didn't, but lots did.
Lots did, exactly. And it's not until sometime years gone by you look back at these leaders. But this is where we've come unstuck in Australia politically. We haven't had enough of a challenge to bring out of the woodwork political people with real depth of character. Dutton may potentially have that, but this is why Dan won, because he's strong. He's strong and he's definite. And yet his credit card is so maxed out. The debt is in Victoria is twice the size of, or is the size of New South Wales and Queensland and Tassie combined. I read the other day. This is frightening. And yet nobody seems to be concerned about that.
No one.
And it's the old make decisions with your heart, not with your head. If you can make an emotional appeal with a little teeny sound bite and sound like a strong person, you can sell ice to Eskimos. It's not that hard. And McGowan did the same and destroyed the opposition. I think they're down to 2. Yeah. So that tells you all you want to know
over
about.
There, I was talking to Freedom people over there, and they all agreed that he'd win again if they had another election.
Yes. So what do you do in that context? The only solution is for people with strength of character to be promoted into pre-selection positions for the Liberal Party or Liberal Democrats or whoever. I mean, I voted for the United Australia Party and was supportive of them because people like Craig Kelly do have the strength of character. Cory Bernardi was another one. He had the strength of character. But all these small parties struggle because people vote in habitual patterns, really.
Yeah, they do.
Mostly. There's about a 10% who swing.
I heard them at the I was in Darwin when we were voting, and I heard the people behind me just going, "Here, you vote," and go, "Oh, I just always vote for Labor."
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. And if we lived in a time where that didn't matter, and where either side of politics has only slightly different flavours, then it probably wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
But we're on the edge of a crisis, a big one.
Yeah.
If they get away with the central bank digital currency, if they get away with digital ID, and then they start controlling, my view is that the next trick will be another pandemic in 2025. And I was watching a video from the Irish guy, I'll think of his name in a sec, Ivor Cummins, who's a problem-solving expert. He's had some of the best guys on, and he's clever with the way that he does it, so YouTube hasn't knocked him off yet. And he was broadcasting videos of a scenario of the next pandemic in 2025, which will adversely affect kids. Isn't that funny? A pandemic,
This is already happening. I interviewed someone from New Mexico, and their hospitals are full with kids affected by some new virus, respiratory virus.
Yeah, well...
and they're all talking about it, and they're all wearing masks and...
And then we get back to the whole question of where did COVID come from? Yeah. Was it a lab leak?
Yeah.
Well, yes, it was.
Some little Chinaman sticking sticks up a batter.
Well, this is the trouble.
Saying there, I wish I could destroy the world.
and whoever did that was one of the malicious bastards. That's the thing. The malicious bastards are the people who create bioweapons in laboratories and package it up as gain of function. It's not gain of function. It's a bioweapon.
Yeah.
It's a bioweapon.
And even the fact that I can never get over the point that people are going, but you've got Fauci funding a lab in China. Aren't they the enemy?
Yes.
I mean, the unspoken. It's like in the Cold War, getting Russia to build your new nuclear bomb that you might use on Russia. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
And in a normal functioning world where the media did its job and asked the hard questions and there was an honest judiciary system, they would all have been arrested and charged with treason. Because it was even Obama, who I don't have a particularly high view of, who banned the gain of function.
I did. I don't anymore.
Yeah, no. But they banned gain of function because it was so dangerous.
Yeah.
And so what did Fauci do? He said, look, I tell you what, I'll give the money to the Eco Health Alliance and then they can give it to Batwoman and we're all good to go. Hang on a minute. I mean, one of the most interesting books I've got is by Richard, I'll think of his name in a sec. He's a scientist, he's a neuroscientist, a lawyer, and he's got another third credential as well. The guy's a genius. He graduated with a PhD at 17. And he wrote a book called Is COVID-19 a Bioweapon? And he makes the point that I think is a really valid one. The spike protein is the dangerous part of COVID-19. Yeah. That's a bioweapon.
Yeah.
That is a bioweapon. That was designed to infect people, but not kill them all, but just to kill and maim smallish enough
infertile
numbers, make people infertile. So that's a bioweapon. So then you create a vaccine or a gene therapy to make the spike protein in your body's cells to generate an immune response. So that means you're making a bioweapon. Whatever positive benefit it might have, it's still a bioweapon. And nobody's really wants to speak that out loud because it's got such malicious implications.
And now they're making all these factories which are going to create millions, hundreds of millions. So they've got to give that to someone. I guess they're expecting us.
Well, this is where I think it comes down to local action and people just becoming a little bit aware of the fact that this stuff is so dangerous. The lipid nanoparticles and the whole technology of this is so frighteningly dangerous or risky. You know, it's not dangerous to everybody. It's like Russian roulette. You put a gun to your head and you've got a bullet in one chamber. You've got a 5 out of 6 chance of not dying.
Well, I interviewed a fourth jabber in Bunbury and she's going, I haven't been affected at all. I'm not sure I'll take the fifth. And I'm thinking, and I didn't say anything. She liked McGowan and I found it very interesting. I think in order to try fix this, we have to understand what it is they are buying from them. Because to me, I see the government selling Mordor. death and tyranny, and we're selling liberty and freedom and follow your dreams, and they're going, no, we don't want that. We're going with Mordor. And you're going, you know, and so when she's talking, I'm trying not to debate her, just trying to let her get it out. But she could hear there was some problems, but they were deep, and maybe she couldn't articulate them. The next thing I just want to move on to, though, from your position, because you probably worked with them a lot, is the media. From what I see, the greatest betrayer of Australians in our time is the current media.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree. I had no idea the Australian media was so bad until I was watching the results of the US election, the 2020 election, you know, when Trump lost. And it was very obvious from looking at the alternative media channels that the level of corruption in American elections is legendary. Like, it's been going on for 20 years. The Republicans and the Democrats have both had their fingers in the pie. It's utterly shifty. It's not all corrupt. They managed to corrupt something like the 5 swing states just enough to get him out. And let's leave aside the fact that the Hunter Biden laptop from hell scandal was completely obliterated from the media and called Russian disinformation. Let's leave that aside. The American elections were corrupt. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, thank goodness our Australian media isn't that corrupt. That would never happen here. And yet it has exactly happened. And until you realise that the Trusted News Initiative exists, where all these media intermediary companies, Thomson Reuters and these companies that feed the media stories to the local channels, said, we're going to stop disinformation. And it was disinformation to do with the US election, but that then morphed into COVID disinformation. You realise that there is, in fact, a giant blanket over Australian media.
Yeah.
I mean, it is impossible for an ordinary person to keep up with the amount of evidence there is of dodginess, but it's all in the alternative media.
Yeah,
it's in Telegram.
Twitter is like a Twitter and Telegram. Yeah,
Twitter, YouTube, Telegram. I follow half a dozen different Telegram channels, and the best of the lot, in my opinion, in terms of media, is the Spectator Australia. The Spectator Australia has been resolutely banging the drum, and they use top quality international calibre experts as well as investigative journalists. They've been banging the drum for 2.5 years, and everything they've said has been accurate and spot on. But the Australian media as a whole has vacated the space. And this is the power. If the media doesn't want to talk about something, it effectively ceases to exist. So if Channel 9 tonight went on, if there was an announcement on Channel 9 that said the ABS has just released the latest data that is shocking, 17.1% of excess mortality has occurred in the last 12 months. This is a catastrophe. And then they got some epidemiologist on to say, this is unprecedented. We have no idea what it is, and we're frightened as all get out, and we've got a SWAT team from the Department of Health looking into what it is. Everybody have gone, well, what is it? What is it? And then night after night, you could have follow-up stories. So at any point, any Australian media outlet, if it wanted to return to what journalism used to be, which was to keep government honest, they could blow this sky high.
Well, the reason we took the vaccine was to stop excess mortality, and that wouldn't have even reached these levels.
That's correct.
You know, but the real interesting thing with the media, like all the ones that are private, I understand. There's money behind them to get it. But the ABC, that prides itself on being the people's voice. Yeah. They're the greatest of all. They've got, there's no money really behind them worth doing it. They just seem to be, and my heart broke when Stan Grant threw that guy off Q&A, the young man. Yeah. And I just thought, you're throwing someone out of the debate because you don't like what they're saying.
Yes, that is extraordinary. When you consider that the bar to which the ABC is supposed to rise is much higher than a commercial channel.
That's correct.
They're supposed to be impartial. They're supposed to act in the national interest. So, yeah, I agree. In terms of a moral lapse, the ABC is right up there. But they have failed. The only reasonably good media is not Australian, except for The Spectator. GB News, which you do get on YouTube, is outstanding with Mark Stein, who's a good author, and they have a few others. But you've got to go looking. The average Australian doesn't know this form of media even exists. They read the Advertiser, the Sunday Mail, the Australian, the Melbourne Age. They watch Sky. They might get a little bit of a hint on Sky that things are not good, but the average Australian is essentially anaesthetised. That's the role, for me, that's the role of the media, to anaesthetise Australians and go, do you know what? You know, the race was good. Everybody's in good form. The football, blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, the pizza bar got blown up. And, a couple of cars got burnt, but all is good with the world. There really isn't a problem. Yeah. The vaccines are great. And by the way, have you got? Are you up to date with your shots?
Yeah.
So that's the role the media plays, to insulate anybody who doesn't care to do a little bit of investigating. So you've got to go, hang on a minute, I know that's not true. Or maybe you've had a friend who's dropped dead suddenly or disabled and you think, hell, how did that happen?
But the greatest question with that then isn't so much that they're doing that, but the Australians obviously want that. You know, otherwise they would. You're saying they don't. Maybe it's not a question of don't. They won't. There's a good majority, like you said, 10% critical thinkers. This is the real interesting thing, because they're not looking. Because to not be suspicious now, after everything that's been through, takes a great amount of will.
Yeah, no, I agree. But there's a percentage of people who could be swayed. If you like, they're like the swinging voters. If we had some good investigative journalists going, so for example, if there was a 60 minutes expose on sudden adult death syndrome with a strong suggestion that it was the vaccine that was causing this, not some mystery illness, there would be a group of people who would start to get more up in arms. And at the end of the day, politicians are afraid of pissing people off. And the more people get on the phone or write letters and say, this is an issue for me, the more politicians go, well, what should we do about this? But because the media is as a whole is literally blanketing this, nobody's got any idea. I spoke to a friend of mine and I was talking about the fact that there's this deception in America about the elections, and she said, you couldn't pull the wool over people's eyes like that. You couldn't possibly do that. So I just left that one. I didn't argue the toss. But for me, the old adage, you can fool most of the people. You can fool some of the people some of the time.
It's easier to fool the people.
It's easier to fool some of the people some of the time, but not all of the people all the time. That's wrong. You can fool almost all of the people all of the time, as long as you own media.
Yeah. And that's, I think, Mark Twain's one is, it's easier to fool someone than convince them they've been fooled.
Yes, that's exactly right. Well, the problem now is 95% of the Australian populace has been jabbed, or so they say. So now, to face the prospect that they may have turbo cancers occurring, that they may be susceptible to heart attack, or any one of the 8 pages of diseases and conditions that the Pfizer documents outlined were seen in the trials, that's a bit frightening. And the fact that there is reverse transcription, Peter McCullough's even come out and said, there is reverse transcription. This probably will cause or could cause genetic damage in subsequent generations. This is the greatest medical crisis in world history.
Medical crime.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
I got a couple of brilliant quotes that I came across in my travels. Yeah, this is Dr. Aseem Malhotra, the British cardiologist. He said, "This is perhaps the greatest miscarriage of medical science we will witness in our lifetime." And this is a guy who took the jab, and then his father dropped dead of a heart attack.
Yeah.
And they did an autopsy, and that led to him writing an article that basically debunked the whole thing. Now he's coming out as an anti-vaxxer.
Yeah.
But he's hard to ignore because he's a cardiologist.
Yeah.
And he was on the telly saying, don't forget to get your jab.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So and
he's good looking, which helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and these are the people who are worth gold. This is why in Australia, the Australian Medical Professional Society is the most important spearhead against this evil, because they're doctors.
Yeah.
I met Chris Neal, who's the president, who's a really good guy, and people are not going to listen to me. They're not going to listen to you, not that much. But when a cardiologist says something, or a neurosurgeon says something, or an emergency physician says we are seeing a huge uptick in whatever, then people will stop, and they will. Those who are swingers, whose minds are open to the possibility they've been scammed, will start to think something's wrong here. But until those doctors speak out, we're fighting an uphill battle because they can just ignore them. And that's why the role of AMPS is so vital, in my opinion, in Australia, because you can't ignore a whole professional association with people who have got expertise. You can say you might be wrong, but you can't discount them.
Can I ask you, from your opinion too, because I think about this, I talk to so many people. Everyone says, people are not believing the truth because they want to feel safe. But do you actually also think a lot of it is status? They crave status over liberty? Not everybody, but
no.
enough.
Well, yes. My one of the most important lessons that I've ever learnt in my life is the importance of knowing when you're wrong and saying that you're wrong, and being okay with being wrong. I've had a number of personal experiences that have helped me to be able to do that, and for me, that's really vital. Whereas the vast majority of people like to, as you've said, they like to look good, and they don't want to say, do you know, I've made a catastrophic mistake in this decision here. And so it's a pride thing. Nobody likes to admit that they might have made a small decision that's wrong, but to make a really, really significant, potentially life-changing one. I mean, the most tragic example is Maddie de Garay. This little girl was 12 years old. She was in the Pfizer trial. She took the first jab of the Pfizer jab. Within 12 hours, she was paralysed. The girl is now wheelchair-bound. She's unfortunately the poster child for vaccine injuries, and Pfizer wrote her adverse reactions as stomach problems. Yeah. Okay. Now the thing that is disturbing is that her mother is a scientist, and she encouraged the child to participate in the Pfizer trials for all the best reasons. Now,
because faith, she believes it.
She did, and how must she feel? You know, if she'd have been a healthy skeptic and a little bit more aware of the fact that the medical, the clinical drug trials scheme in Big Pharma is quite fraught, and that they typically overtalk the positive aspects of drugs and underestimate the downsides, and they cleverly construct trials to do that because they've got billions invested. She might have said to her daughter, look, honey, that's a wonderful, admirable thing, but this drug is so new, I just don't think it's a wise move. And the kid would have said, oh, okay, Mum. Yeah. And she wouldn't be paralysed in a wheelchair today. Wow. So I imagine the mum probably goes through, feelings of guilt, but she's clearly...
Unless she refuses to believe this.
No, the mum is adamant now that they have done the wrong thing. Yeah. And Maddie de Garay and her mother have testified at several of Senator Johnson's hearings. So they're good. They're good folk. But my point is that it would have been a massive thing for the mother to say, I made this catastrophic error. And that is, I think you're right. It is a human frailty that we don't like to admit that we're wrong.
I even mean in status is the way that if you suddenly come out and question stuff, you can, like you said, you lose your position, lose this. So their status, even with doctors,
in the profession,
because all I hear is people going into hospitals with heart attacks, and the doctors sit on the bed.
Yep.
One woman had 3 fits in front of 3 doctors, and one of them sat on the bed after she'd finished and said, "You realise you're just suffering from anxiety."
Yes. I know. I have heard and read many of the stories of the inability of the medical profession to call a spade a spade.
Yeah,
I understand.
And that's if I wonder if status is the motivation behind them. They're like, I'm a doctor. I've spent years getting here.
Yep.
I've got all this time invested. I want to become a specialist. I've got all this.
Yeah.
And the only thing that could prevent that is admitting a truth that this vaccine is bullshit.
I think the other thing is the problem is now so big that for even a few of them to come out and say, whoa, this is a catastrophic failure of public health and the medical fraternity. For anybody to come out and say that, they virtually know they're putting a target on their back, and they will lose their status. Yeah. That's absolutely true. This is why I worked with some of the COVID Medical Network people, and I drafted or helped to draft one of the letters that the COVID Medical Network sent to the Prime Minister to outline the risks from the child vaccines and to call for a halt. And one of the problems with doing that piece of work was to get signatures on the letter, for obvious reasons. And so inevitably, it's the what they call the old men of medicine, the retirees like Professor Ian Brighthope. They can't get to him; he's retired.
Yeah. I've got him back on my show on Monday.
Robert Clancy, who's retired, one of the most experienced vaccinologists in the country, who calls out the ivermectin scam, but they can't get him. He's in his 80s, you know. So, but it's you're quite right. It is a status thing. My next door neighbour's a retired GP, and I said to him, because we're on the same planet in terms of the American elections, and I said, why are doctors so hesitant to call this sort of stuff out? He said that it's just an inherently conservative profession, and it's rule based, and they live in a medical regulatory environment, and it's quite hard to jump out of the box and say, excuse me, we've just done a really terrible thing. You know? This is what
thalidomide taught us that.
Exactly.
It wasn't a doctor that blew the whistle on that. It was a German prosecutor, I believe.
No, I actually researched the thalidomide story because of some of the work that I was doing. Thalidomide, it was a Sydney doctor and a German who blew the whistle. Yes, you're quite right. But do you know the tragic thing about thalidomide? It took 6 years for that to be pulled off the market. 6 years and 10,000 birth defects before they said, oh dear, it's dangerous.
And they never admitted that they just took it off.
They just took it off. No. And I think this is one of the things that's really good about Robert Kennedy's book. He basically outlines how the medical world, because of the amount of money involved, they've cooked the regulatory process so thoroughly. I mean, in America, the FDA is funded about 40% by the industry, and it's completely captured. There's a revolving door, so a lot of the FDA senior commissioners end up working for Big Pharma and vice versa. It's utterly corrupt, okay? The most obvious example being the mouse vaccine, which was the latest bivalent one that had never been tested on humans. But it was good for the 8 mice. It produced an antibody response. The thing that is shocking when you realise that, though, is that the Australian TGA is even worse. It's 94% funded. I haven't actually validated that, but I have seen it quoted on multiple occasions. So our own drug regulator, whose role is to keep people safe from nasty drugs, is funded almost 100% by the industry. What's the word I'm thinking about? Oh, I know, conflict of interest, that's right. And the best example is Nick Petrovsky, Professor Petrovsky. He got smacked and fined $12,000 for breaching the regulations because he mentioned the name of his vaccine, and they said if you don't take notice of this smack, we could fine you, I can't remember what it was, something like 30 million.
Wow.
But clearly the game is Pfizer doesn't want him because he's a competitor. He's got a vaccine that's safe. Wow, that's neat and effective. And what's he doing with it? He's selling it into Iran. Where they're quite happy with it, but they won't. The pharmaceutical companies won't let him get a door into Australia. I mean, initially, you would assume that they're just bureaucratic impediments because this is a complex business. But at the end of the day, the money involved is so astronomical, and the control of these pharma companies is so mind-boggling. Nobody can stand up against them. I mean, the guy who was just appointed to the TGA as their drug safety person is a former Merck senior executive. I mean, you couldn't make a better conspiracy story up if you tried. It's got conflict of interest written all over it. So this is why it's so screwed, and this is why even if there was a Royal Commission, it's hard to know I doubt that would fix it. It's so deeply, it's like Siamese twins. How are you going to separate these two entities? The public service medical fraternity and the big drug companies, they are enmeshed.
Yeah.
This person gets a $60 million research grant. The best example was the ivermectin trial. There was a very famous, Andrew Hill was his name, who did ran an ivermectin trial. Yes, ivermectin's good. Yes, it works. Then at the 11th hour, he changed his report to say the exact opposite. And Tess Laurie, who's a drug regulatory expert, got on the blower and said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, well. When push came to shove, he fessed up that it was actually a Bill Gates funded not-for-profit who was funding the trial and had said to him, "You will need to change the reports as other way around." And so we changed the report.
Yeah.
And then he got a $40 million grant to Oxford University, to his department in his specialty area, which of course happened by pure coincidence, I'm sure. But, this is the power. And so that's why the system, if you like, is stuck. Even if a handful of people said, this is a mess, we have to fix it, people above them and to the side of them and below them have got some stake in it.
Yeah.
So it's a mess.
Well, just to finish, because I have to go see Dr. Pay, but I'd love to talk to you again.
Sure.
But just to finish, I try to end, and I say this a lot. There was a young girl stood up at one of the marches in Melbourne.
Yep.
And she said she was a hermit. She never came out of her room much, and she came down the march, grabbed the microphone, and said, "If I talk, you got to listen."
Yep.
Because when the introverts start talking, you're in trouble.
Yes.
And she said to me, "You have a moral obligation not to sell hopelessness, no matter how tight its grip."
Yes.
Where is the hope? And I'm talking real hope.
Yes, I agree. Well, there's two hopes. The first one is the hope that is expressed by Mahatma Gandhi in this little quote. "When I despair, I remember that all through history the way of truth and love has always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they can seem invincible. But in the end, they always fail. Think of it, always." So for me, the truth will come out, even if it takes a while, and good people won't stand by and do nothing. And there's a larger and larger number of good people, and I don't know what role I'll play, I don't know what role you'll play, but each in our circles of influence will do the right thing, not the easy thing.
Yeah.
And there's enough of us out there. I think we'll get to the point where a lot of these plans will come unstuck. It won't work as well as they'd hope. So, for example, Omicron, I would regard as a gift from heaven.
Yeah.
Omicron was the perfect vaccine. Really.
Yeah. Dr. Paul Oosterhouse.
That's right. And so stuff happens. So these guys, they've done a very clever job of what they've done, but there's the curveball factor. The other thing, I'm a Christian, and part of this is about when you watch world affairs and you see very broad trends and patterns, you start to think, well, what's going on here? The last the last book of the Bible, Revelation, talks about the end of days and the mark of the beast, and people will need to take the mark of beast on to buy and sell and all that sort of stuff. Now, Revelation is a highly symbolic book, and you can argue that till the cows come home about what it means, but the very simple message is, if Christianity is true, then there is an end to this, and it's a happy end and a good end, although there'll be a bit of drama before we get there. That's the code, that's the simple version of the answer. I don't know if that's true, but we are at an extraordinary time in history where, for the first time ever, a group of people can do things at a global level. Some pimple-faced teenager in Silicon Valley can turn off Craig Kelly's parliamentary speech in Australia. That's incredible. So we've got that on the downside. On the upside, anybody can get onto Telegram, anybody can subscribe to Substack, anybody can meet with friends and get stuff happening. So in a sense, that the internet is both a positive and a negative force.
It's a double-edged sword.
Because if, 50 years ago, if this was being done, none of us would have had a clue. We'd have to wait for the newspapers to tell us, or until we got a letter from a friend.
Yeah.
Now, boom, something happens. The Twitter files get announced and published, and 2 minutes later, people in Australia are reading about the fact that the US government and the FBI colluded with Twitter to censor the Republicans.
Yeah.
So I think we live in, what shall we say, challenging times, but I'm always optimistic, Michael.
That's a perfect way to. That cut off a bit suddenly. I'm sorry about that. So I'm still in South Australia. Hopefully tomorrow I meet Senator Antic. There's a lot of stuff happening at the moment. We need to stay together. The more we're together, the better chance we have. We do have God on our side, but we also need each other on our side. It's time to put all the infighting behind us, all the scandals behind us, and stand together. Because I do believe that they're using what happened in Queensland as a reason to come and maybe root us out. I know Dutton is asking for anyone to dob in family and friends who they think is a conspiracy theorist. We've also told here in South Australia, there's a letter going around to the lawyers that they're not allowed to work pro bono and they're not allowed to go against the police narrative in a case. We're going to find out about that, see if it's true. I'm going to keep doing interviews, but Warren, why don't you go fuck yourself? And but we've got to stand together, guys. I really believe God is on our side. I truly believe that. And as this gentleman said here, we are in evil times. God bless to us all, and good luck.